you could encounter, or examples of which you could encounter on the BEC portion of the CPA exam. And as I have mentioned in previous videos, the best way to use this video is to review the summarized information, and when you reach a question, stop the video and analyze the question and arrive at an answer. When you've answered the question, restart the video and review my explanation of the answer. Now, before we go on into the summarization of information on business cycle indicators, I want to point out to you again that there is a short and an excellent video from Khan Academy on business cycles. And again, I provided the link to the YouTube video. And again, I highly recommend this and all the Khan Academy videos on economics. They'll provide you a lot of good insight. So with that being said, let's start out and take a look at the first video, or the first slide presentation. And this is a pictorial of business cycles. And what you can see is that we take a look at the vertical axis. And this says the level of real output. And when we say output, that is GDP, gross domestic product. And notice it says level of real output, meaning that this is a gross domestic product adjusted for inflation. So then we look at the horizontal axis, and this is over time. So what we can see is that the economy goes over cycles through different periods of time. And you can see with the trend line, you can see the economy is growing, but it's not growing in a straight line. It's going through a number of different cycles. And the first cycle that it shows is we start out, I'm just going to start off with the peak. And from that point, when we reach the peak, then what we're going to do is the economy will go as far as it can, and then it's going to result in what we call a recession or a contraction. Then it'll go through the recession into what we call a trough, which will basically be the lowest point of the recession. And then after that, what will happen is the economy will begin expanding again, and it will go through what we call an expansion, or another word for expansion is recovery, when we're coming out of basically a trough. It'll reach a peak again. Once it reaches the peak, it'll go back to recession, through trough, through expansion, and so forth. So these are the cycles of the economy. Now, let's just briefly explain each of these cycles. First of all, expansion. Or not only expansion, but it's also called a recovery when it's basically coming out of the trough. It's categorized by an increase in economic activity. That means the real GDP is increasing, income is increasing, employment is increasing, manufacturing and retail sales are also increasing. Now, how do we know that these items are actually increasing? We do this through what we call economic indicators. And there are three major types of economic indicators. The first one is called a leading indicator, means that these indicators are the indicators, when they change, they're telling you what's going to be happening in the future. They're leading. Then you have coincidental indicators that are occurring basically exactly as we're going through the particular economic cycle. And then you have lagging indicators, which are the indicators that are confirming that you're in that particular business cycle. So as I mentioned here again, this basically, when we have an expansion, this is first indicated by an increase in leading and then coincidental indicators. This is followed by an increase in lagging indicators. Then when we reach the peak of the business cycle, the peak of the expansion or the recovery, that then is the upper turning point of the business cycle, when expansion now then it turns into contraction. So in a recession or / contraction, it's categorized by a decrease in economic activity. In other words, real GDP is going to start falling, income will fall, employment will fall, meaning unemployment will rise. Manufacturing and retail sales will also fall. Again, this is first indicated by a drop in leading economic indicators, then the coincidental indicators, then this is followed by a decline in lagging economic indicators. And for our purposes, we've only had one of these, basically, actually, 1 to 2 of these in the 1929 through about 1937. And if we have an extended recession for that long, it's called a depression. Then we also have the trough, which is a lower turning point of the business cycle when the contraction leads to recovery and or expansion. Now, if we take a look at leading indicators, okay, these are measures that are used to predict basically recoveries or recessions. And basically what they're doing is there's no official indicators, and the indicators are not always correct. But most of the cases, we do use things like new orders for goods and services, building permits, stock market and the stock market indices, the money supply, whether it's expanding or contracting, consumer confidence. These are all leading economic indicators that are predicting that there will be some change in the business cycle. Now, there is coincidental indicators, and these are the metrics that move with the business cycle itself. And that includes such indicators as GDP. Retail sales are aggregate payrolls. The more people, the higher the payrolls, the more people we're paying. Personal income and economic indicators such as those. There's also lagging indicators, and these are metrics that begin moving up after an expansion or moving down after a contraction is underway. And that includes things like employment levels, consumer and business loans, interest rates, and things like that. Now, let's take a look at question number 1. What period is characterized by decreasing levels of economic activity and an increase in unemployment? Stop the video, do your analysis, arrive at your answer, then restart the video again. Okay, the answer in this particular case is going to be C, contraction. Okay, this, as I mentioned here, it's best describes a contraction or a recession, depending upon what you want to call it, and it can be called both things in the CPA exam. Okay, decreasing levels of activity would result in a negative aggregate demand and supply curve shifts. In other words, they both shift to the left, resulting in an equilibrium that will result in a decreasing gross domestic product. Contraction would see decreasing levels of economic activity and an increasing unemployment rate. Again, stop the video, perform your analysis, select your answer, and then when you're ready, restart the video. The answer to number 2 would be A, recovery. Now, you may have picked B, expansion, because basically when we have increasing GDP, it is an expansion, or it can also be called a recovery. The reason we use recovery as a correct answer in this case is because a recovery is generally recovering from a recession. So that would be the most appropriate answer, although A and B look right. A would be the correct answer. Now, again, what will happen from an economic standpoint when we're having a recovery? Positive demand and supply curve shifts will result in an equilibrium that will result in a higher GDP. And we're going to have obviously increasing levels of economic activity and a decreasing unemployment rate. Okay, let's try number 3. Periods of increased aggregate spending result in a positive aggregate demand curve shift along with positive aggregate supply curve shifts. Again, stop the video. When you made your answer, restart the video. Okay, in number 3, the answer would be B, expansion. Positive aggregate demand and supply curve shifts will result in an equilibrium that will result in a higher GDP. Expansion would see increasing levels of economic activity and a decreasing unemployment rate. Now you'll notice in this case the question is talking about supply, or in this case supply and demand curve shifts, positive. This would indicate that we're in an expansion. If they shifted negatively, we would be in a recession. Or again, stop the video, perform your analysis of the question, arrive at your answer, and then restart the video. Okay, in this case, the answer is we're looking for a recovery will be indicated by all items except for C, a reduction in the purchase of normal goods accompanied by an increase in the purchase of inferior goods. So if we take a look at A, increased factory orders would be indicative of a recovery. B, increase in personal travel. People have more to spend, they're going to travel more. Again, that would be a part of recovery. A decrease in unemployment, meaning the employment rate is going up. So that would also be a recovery. But C, what happens is the answer is in a recovery, consumers will tend to purchase normal goods as their wealth increases. But by the same token, consumers would tend to purchase inferior goods as their wealth decreases during recession. So the answer C is indicating the opposite of a recovery. Let's try number 5. Which of the following would be a leading indicator of an upcoming increase in GDP? Again, stop the video. When you've arrived at your answer, restart the video. Number 5, the answer would be C, increase in factory orders. An increase in factory orders would be the indicator that the aggregate demand curve is undergoing a positive demand shift. An increase in unemployment is normally an indicator of a recession. Also, the unemployment rate is not really a leading indicator, it's a lagging indicator typically. An increase in interest rates would more likely result in a negative supply and demand curves, as interest rates would likely reduce demand. And again, interest rates are typically lagging indicators. So the answer in this case again is C, increase in factory orders. And with that, that is the end of this instructor video.